All right, welcome back in. And hello to West Campus, hello to South Campus. I'm glad that you're able to join us as well. I have not been to South Campus. I have been to West Campus, which I loved because it felt like Texas to me. Have you been out there? Yeah, that's when as a Coloradoan, when I think of Texas, West Campus is what I think of. Not that this is not great right here. You all are great. It's just my truth. Sorry. I wanted to talk about the right kind of safe. How do we create an environment where we can talk about difficult things? And I'll give you a little bit of background as we dive into this, but our ministry is located in Manitou Springs, Colorado. Manitou Springs was described by the New York Times Travel Reviewer in 2 words: hippie Mayberry. It is truly hippie. Little hippie town right at the foot of Pikes Peak. Somebody said, I bet people there, they're so real liberal. I bet they voted for Bernie Sanders. And I said, you do not understand my town. Bernie Sanders was way too conservative for my neighbors to vote for him. No, so it's all those other people down ballot, American Socialist Workers Party and all of that. Those were the ones they preferred. But in an environment like that, where people are so vastly different, how do you communicate biblical truth? Now, again, I'll stick this up there so you can notice this. If you didn't happen to see this or get a picture of it in the last session, if you scan that code right there, I will send you the PowerPoints for all of these sessions. And the way that works, you take a picture, you'll see that it pulls up a little web page. It'll ask you for your name and your email address. You take your name and email address, you put it in there, and then it will email that information to you. And then, if you want to stay in touch with some ministries, you can. We send some different newsletters about how to understand a biblical worldview of, whatever Squid Game or whatever the thing is that's in the news right now. How do you see that from a biblical worldview? I also have a podcast that comes out every Tuesday. It's called the Dr. Jeff Show Podcast. And I interview major thought leaders from many fields of influence to show how our worldview changes everything. So people have been on there who are celebrities, political leaders, economists, all different kinds of people from all different fields of influence. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to travel and speak in South Africa. And while I was there, I met a man from the Zulu tribe. And he said to me, "Sawubona." And so I asked my buddy who was there, Ken, I said, "Hey, man, what does that mean?" He said, "It means hello." I said, "Well, but I'm a word geek." I said, "There's what's the real meaning of it?" He said, "The literal meaning is, I see you. I see you. In other words, you are not invisible. I take you into account." I thought, that's so much better than our typical American greeting, right? What's up? What's up is to imply that what you are doing is what gives you value. So Sawubona implies that who you are is what gives you value. As I mulled that over and tried to figure out how to apply that to our work at Summit Ministries, we developed this, and I'd like for you to just try to draw this on your notes. I see several of you are taking notes. If you've got a piece of paper there, I'd like for you to try to draw a DNA double helix. When I draw it out, mine are a lot simpler than what's up on the screen. It's just a squiggly line going this way, and then a squiggly line going the other way, intersecting with it. You got it? Okay, this is not art class. This is for you. All right, now I want you to draw the connecting nucleotides in between the 2 strands. Here's how we see it at Summit. The DNA of influence is 2 strands. The first strand is truth. The second strand is relationship. What is your job? So simple. If you don't remember anything else from this entire weekend, just remember this. Your job is to put connecting points between truth and relationship for somebody every day. That's it. Why is it important to do both? Because truth without a relationship leads to arrogance. Do you know the know-it-all? Isn't it irritating to be around that person? Mark Twain described a fanatic as a person who will not change his mind and will not change the subject. That kind of person we tried to get out of conversations with rather than into conversations with. But on the other hand, you know people who it's only about the relationship and not about the truth. You have your truth, I have my truth. We'll just have to agree to disagree. You know, that's cool, whatever you believe. After a while, you don't even really want to talk to that person anymore about what you think because they're like, that's cool, you know. And you're like, no, there's actually stuff that really needs to be talked about here. So you take both of those two things and put them together, however, and you've got a daily mission. If you talk to our Summit Ministries staff and ask them, what's your job? They'll probably tell you their job title, but then they will tell you, my actual job is to put rungs in the ladder between truth and relationship for somebody every day. That's what they do, okay? So they'll draw out that little DNA double helix. They'll say, that's what I'm doing, connecting truth and relationship every day. That's my job. All right, make sense? Why is it so important? Because it probably is at least partly the answer to the flight of young adults away from the church. The Barna Research Group, which is a company founded by George Barna, now it's run by a guy named David Kinnaman, found that young adults who stayed in church were twice as likely to have a close personal friendship with an adult inside the church. Those who had an intentional mentor at church were 2.5, almost 3 times as likely to stay involved. That when you connect truth and relationship together, it's incredibly powerful. So how do you do that? How do you do that with the people you meet? So I get in conversations with people all of the time. My wife, Stephanie, who is here with me, she loves people. She gets in conversations with people all the time. We end up in some really strange conversation situations because we are open to it. Now, not all of the time. It's not like we feel that 24 hours a day we have to be ready to have conversations with people, but it's an anticipation that something might come up that could lead us into really interesting things to talk about. Conversation is the first skill I want to talk about. The second skill I want to talk about, so if you're taking notes, leave a little bit of space in between, is discussion. And the third skill I want to talk about is coaching. Because my goal is not just that you open up the opportunity to talk with people about your faith. My goal is that you open up an opportunity where other people see you as a trusted guide on everything. Like you're the kind of person that people just want to talk to. Starting with conversation. I want to teach you 5 conversation-altering words that help to me, because at root, I'm an introvert. I don't necessarily draw energy from other people. I love y'all, but at the end of the day, if you follow me to the airport, I will get grumpy. Like I want to go home. And I want to be with Stephanie, and I want to be with our dog, Clive, who's named after C.S. Lewis. That's how nerdy I am. And I need the time away from people to recharge. So sometimes in conversations, I get a little frustrated with stuff that's really surfacey. So I've learned 5 conversation-altering words. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. Couple of places I learned this. One of my children is very quiet. Does not like to talk about things. If he volunteers any information at all, I just ask, hey, tell me more about that. Because that's the opening to try to communicate a little bit more. I also learned it when I was teaching a Sunday school class. I had a guy in my class, this is back in Tennessee, whose name was Doc. He wasn't a doctor. His parents named him Doc, which is a cool thing about living in East Tennessee. You can name your kid Doc, and he gets to be a doc his whole life, even if he doesn't graduate from 6th grade. So Doc is in my class, and he's got his own business. He's doing very well, but he is not engaged. Do you know what nonverbal non-engagement looks like? I mean, he sat in the back row, arms crossed, scowl on his face, legs crossed, as if it was the last place in the world he wanted to be. It was intimidating. Oh, but I didn't have to talk to the guy because there were a lot of people in the class. One day I walked in to set up the computer. I was using PowerPoint slides, and Doc was the only one in the room. So I felt like I needed to talk to him. So I asked him, Doc, what are your hobbies? What do you do for fun? He never changed his posture or his expression. He just said, I'm building an airplane. Excuse me? What did you say? I'm building an airplane. Where? Where do you build an airplane? In my garage. Tell me more about that. He talked about the airplane. Then he asked me, you want to see it? Of course I want to see it. I went over to Doc's house. The garage thing wasn't quite accurate. He had built a little warehouse next to his house. He had all of the parts in bins, all barcoded, so he knew exactly what to put on where and when. It was fascinating, like a 1,000,000-piece Lego set. And then he said, well, here's how this works. You push this pedal, and then this wire pulls this and does this. I said, man, that's a little sketch, isn't it? I mean, there's just one wire. He's like, that's how all airplanes run. I'm like, you just ruined my entire life. We talked about the airplane for an hour. At the end of the hour, he said, when I'm done, you want to fly with me? No, sir, I do not. But forever after, we had something to talk about, just starting with 5 conversation-altering words. This is why you're going to want to get a copy of the slides of these notes, because I just want to give you illustrations of what questions you might use. So for example, when you're getting to know someone, I'm interested in knowing more about you. What's your story? What's your story? You know, most people have an answer to that question, but nobody ever asks them. We live in a culture that's all about telling people things, not asking them things. What's important to you? If you become the individual who asks rather than tells, you gain a very high level of trust. Can you tell me a little about your family? What were some of the most shaping experiences of your life so far? How do you see yourself in terms of your gifts and potential? What is it you dream about being or doing someday? These questions open up conversation, especially with young adults. Let me give you another set. I'd like to know more about your interests. If you want to gain trust with someone, you follow what they are interested in. Have you ever noticed that the very effective people who, let's say you want to buy a new car, who do you end up buying the car from? Most likely, it's a person who got to know you. Have you ever thought about that? Like, even more important than telling you about the car they have to sell is asking you about your lifestyle, what you like. What sorts of things make you feel like a car is a good, safe place for you, or it helps you feel better about yourself? Because even though that sounds vain, we all know that we do sort of identify, we feel better or worse about ourselves depending on the things we're surrounded with. But questions like this: what are some of your likes and dislikes? What kinds of activities, extracurricular activities, hobbies, etc., interest you? What is it about those things you find interesting? What sorts of activities are you involved in at the present time? What have you done that you've gotten really good feedback on from others? What context are you in when you feel most like yourself? What kinds of activities have you thought sound interesting but haven't tried yet? Do you see what's going on here? Before you even get to a discussion of spiritual things, you're just curious. People are interesting. Even people who are interested in things that don't interest you at all, well then, what an incredible opportunity to meet them. Because then you get to learn about what kinds of things other people are interested in. A third level of questions would be spiritual things. Again, I'm telling you this from the perspective of a guy from Manitou Springs, Colorado. Everybody in my town is spiritual. Everybody is spiritual. If you ask questions about spiritual things, guaranteed conversation. I'm interested in spiritual things and would like to know where you are spiritually at this point in your life. You say, but isn't that kind of an invasive question? You know what's really strange? I had somebody who was one of my classmates in my doctoral program who was an atheist and a leader in the LGBT community in Denver, Colorado. And we became very good friends in the doctoral program talking about spiritual things. Say, wait a second, she's an atheist. Oh no, very spiritual. Hey, do you believe in ghosts? Absolutely. She would talk about all of her experiences. But it's don't be afraid because other people aren't afraid of that. You say, but I've met somebody who is afraid. I think it's true. There are people who don't want to talk about spiritual things, but that's not most people. Listen, Summit Ministries, we've started doing nationwide polling in the last year. Not because we want to be a polling company, but because we want to understand the cultural moment that we're part of. And you know what we found? 5 to 8% of people in the United States of America are super grumpy at Christians. 5 to 8%, and that's it. 72% of Americans, believe this or not, say that they believe the values found in the Bible are essential to a healthy American society. 82% of African Americans said they believe the values found in the Bible are essential for a healthy American society. And so people are more open than you think if you can just ask the question. You can even ask, say, I have a relationship with Jesus. And to some people that sounds crazy, so I even feel a little bit sometimes weird talking about it. But have you ever thought about that? Did you ever go to church growing up? How did it strike you? Was it a good experience or bad experience overall? You don't have to funnel a person into the right answer. You just are, at this point, you're just asking questions. You're starting conversation. How would you describe your spiritual growth at the present time? All right, is this helpful? Does this make sense so far? It's conversation. Why conversation? Conversation leads to discussion. Conversation is getting to know the other person. Discussion is two people who now trust one another talking about a subject of mutual interest. So you're talking about maybe a political issue. How much should the government do? We all think the government should do something. It should at least build roads and provide for the national defense. Some people also think the government should guarantee jobs or whatever. So how do we know? How would we know? How would we make those kinds of decisions? Again, people sometimes have thought this through more than you realize. And they think, I think the government could do a little bit more. I think there are a lot of people out there who have more money, and they're not really paying it all to the government the way they should be. And if they did, then the government could provide for more people. There are a lot of people who think that. But they don't end up talking about it because they aren't sure what will happen. Did you know that one of our surveys showed that 75% of Republicans and I think it was 55% of Democrats said they believe things they are afraid to talk about because they might be socially shamed or even lose their jobs. So if we are the ones who make it safe to talk about those things, it can be huge. What do? Okay, this is going to take a little humility for you. The very best strategy for a good conversation is to play dumb. Truly. I found this with my kids. When it's hard to talk with them, I play dumb. Can you help me understand? Can you show me? Like I might ask, hey man, I was hearing about these songs that are out there from these artists, and it sounds all, sketchy and negative and all that. What songs do you listen to? Conversation ender. So I just said, hey, guys, I am really tired of all the songs on my running playlist. I need some new running songs. And one of them's like, so slow songs? Yeah, thank you. Can you recommend some songs? Yeah, here's some songs that we think are good running songs. They gave me 30 or 40 songs. It costs 99 cents to buy each one of them. So I'm in for $30 or $40. I put them on my running playlist. I'm running along. I hear everything that's going into the minds and hearts of my kids. We have an opportunity to have the discussion. What's the latest game? Or whatever it happens to be. Why is everybody looking at TikTok? I don't understand. Well, can you show me? Right? What does it look like? Can you show me? Incredibly, people tend to take compassion on people who are dumb. Oh, my mom is so dumb. I need to help her understand the culture or whatever it is. I'm telling you, it works. So, what do you do in those discussions? Here are 3 things to ask about and 3 things to talk about. So the first thing to ask about is friends. So here's the way I phrase it. With a couple of my kids, a couple of them, I ask a question, they will answer. Like they're all in on conversation all the time. A couple of them, very reticent. If I said, what do you think about this issue that's in the news? I'm not likely to get much of an answer. But you know what I found? When I ask, hey, does this ever come up at school? Like, do your teachers talk about this at all? And what do they say? And what do your friends think about it? Just removing that one step allows the conversation to improve. Second thing is feelings. How do you feel about the things that are going on? I know I was trained growing up, feelings are unreliable and thoughts are what we should be focusing on. But the truth is, people feel anxiety today. They feel depressed. They feel a sense of purposelessness. And feelings are a way of thinking. So to talk about them, hey, a lot of people say they're feeling anxious right now. Has that affected you? Have you felt that way? What's happening, do you think, that's causing that? One time I was getting ready to give a talk about millennials and Gen Z. So I took all my kids out for a hamburger. I said, okay, guys, I'm getting ready to give a talk on this topic. And you know how ignorant I am. I need some help. Can you help me understand your generation? Well, what do you want to know? Well, what does your generation think about truth? What do your friends think about God? If I were going to try to communicate about God with somebody in your generation, where would I even start? You see what I'm doing? I'm kind of outsourcing the whole talk that I have to give to my kids. I've learned over time that's the most honest way to do it. One of my sons, he and I love to scuba dive. So we were down in Florida scuba diving. I said, we got to go to this conference in St. Louis on the way back, and then we'll just be there for a day, and I'm going to speak. And so we get there, and I'm getting ready to speak. He's like, what's your topic? And I said, I'm speaking on how to rescue children from the culture of irresponsibility. He just stared at me and he said, they asked you to speak on that? I said, yeah, they did. Is that a problem? He said, you're like the most irresponsible parent ever. I said, what do you mean? He said, you always let us play on the roof when we wanted to. You let us shoot BB guns in the backyard. I said, okay, all right. I didn't know what you meant. I just had to ask the question. But anyway, it all comes back to, why did he feel free to say, that's a terrible idea? You don't want other dads being like, you're the guy who built a 124-foot zip line in our backyard and didn't put a brake on it. All right. Third is future. The future. Imagine your future self. It's a good way to make decisions. What should I do? What should I do? You get all panicked, right? If you just ask, 6 months from now, what do I want to say happened in this situation? And then I work my way back to where I am now. Or you could say, 10 years from now, what kind of person do you want to be able to look back and say you were when you faced this decision? So it's expanding the horizons, talking about the future. 3 things to ask about. Does that make sense? Okay, 3 things to talk about. First is vulnerability. I remember feeling insecure. I remember feeling how bad it was to be the last person selected for kickball at recess. I remember feeling that I wasn't going to fit in my new school. When I remember making a decision that was horrible, and I felt so guilty about it. When I'm vulnerable about my own experiences, it creates an opportunity for other people to become vulnerable. At Summit Ministries, I won't go into a lot of detail about this, but when I'm at the Summit Ministries program, I try to lead with vulnerability. Now, it's not just like a tell-all kind of thing. Vulnerability scaffolds, usually. When you're a little vulnerable, if the other person responds by being vulnerable, then you can be vulnerable, and it starts to grow. You don't want to just gush everything out at one time. That's the whole point of conversation and discussion, not just making it one-way communication. But I will tell the students, I said, why am I pro-life? Because when I was in college, I got my girlfriend pregnant. And I remember her calling saying, I think I'm pregnant. And I just let it pause. And then she said, I think we need to get an abortion. And I realized in that pause I had spoken volumes to her. Because even though we knew, hey, this is probably not optimal for our future careers, there must have been a part of her thinking, isn't he even just a little bit happy? We created a life. And we chose to have an abortion, which I have to deal with every day. Now, listen, I believe God has forgiven me. But I had to get to the place where I was willing to share that story. Why did we end up getting an abortion? Because I could not be a man in that moment and step up and say, we're in this together. Did you realize how common that is? Did you know that 75% of women who choose to get an abortion do so to please someone else? Freedom of choice, that's a myth. They're not choosing. They're constrained in their choices. And I can bring that up, but I have to be vulnerable to do it. Does that make sense? All right, second thing is vision. Let me tell you what I see in you. Let me tell you what I see in you. I have yet to have a conversation where I say, you know, we've spent just enough time together for me to see something about you that I want to mention that I just think is so incredible. It does not matter whether the person is 8 or 80. They become quiet and receive that. I mean, we do all of the time, and you probably do this too, but Stephanie and I will regularly, we were at dinner the other night with a couple, and the server had mentioned that he had his fiance or something like that. And I said, when did you get engaged? And he said, I just got engaged last week. So he brought the food out, and I said, hey man, can you come over here? We're people who pray, and we just want to pray a blessing over your engagement, that you guys will be super blessed. Oh, of course. You know, I think Stephanie and I were talking about this. We've only ever had one person say, no, cool, you know. Everybody else is like, yeah, of course. If you want to speak a blessing over me or pray a blessing over me, I'm all in. I want to be blessed. So to be able to say, let me tell you something that I see in you that I think is so incredible. You create an opening in a heart. And then third is values. You know, I would say to my kids, one thing I have never regretted is that I really tried to study Scripture and figure out how the wisdom from Scripture applies to my everyday life. I can share about what I value, what's most important, what my relationship with God means when it's in the context of all of these other pieces. All right, is that helpful? All right, third is coaching. Now, I left a whole lot of time at the end here for this because several years ago, as I was a professor, and professors have a lot of flexibility in how they use their time. Between your office hours and your class time, and then summers, very flexible, Christmas break, very flexible, fall break, spring break. You know, some people look at that and say, so basically a professor only works 8 months a year part-time, which is not really true, but there is some flexibility. And all of that I say by way of background. I used my flexible time to do a lot of work with other companies. They wanted help. Like, our communication is terrible, it's dysfunctional. Can you come in and help us understand what's going wrong and how to fix it? So I would come in and do surveys and talk to people and analyze things and then come back with a solution. And people pay a lot of money for this. But here's the thing I noticed. It was very distressing. I would give them the solution, say, here's the solution, here's how to implement it, and they would put it in the drawer and never do anything with it. Are you kidding me? You just spent thousands of dollars for that, and you're doing nothing with it? So I met this guy, and we actually started another business together. He said, let's try some of these techniques about executive coaching. So instead of just giving them the report, we would say, here's the report. Now, who's the main person in charge of implementing it? Because we want to have a meeting by phone or in person for 1 hour every week for the next 8 weeks to make sure your implementation goes well. Do you know, when we looked at his companies and the ones I was working with, they were 4 times as successful at achieving their goals just by having us personally connect with them. Okay, what do you do in that 1 hour meeting that makes such a difference? There are some biblical principles that are at play here. The first one is listening. Scripture talks about listening all the time. James 1:19, my dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. The second one was asking powerful questions. We weren't telling them or challenging them. It wasn't like they were on the witness stand and we were cross-examining attorneys. We're asking questions to help open up their ability to solve their problems and knock down whatever barriers would stop them. So Proverbs 18:13, he who answers before listening, that is his folly and his shame. In Tennessee, people understood this very well. You probably understand this in Texas. If you had people say, what a shame. Remember when people say that? When do they say, what a shame? When somebody has not risen to their full potential, right? And it's usually some sort of a tragic situation. The young person who graduates and was an outstanding athlete goes out and gets drunk, wraps their car around a pole, breaks their leg, and their sports career is over. We say, what a shame. Because it's a lost potential, right? Well, and again, I hate to just take Southernisms and apply them back on Scripture as our interpretive framework, but there's a lot of power here. What is a shame about answering before listening? You cut short the potential of a conversation. Third, then, is helping the other person set worthy goals. Isaiah 32:8 talks about this, but the noble man makes noble plans, and by noble deeds he stands. So this guy and I, starting this company, we said these are going to be our 3 guiding principles right here. We want to become people not just who suggest a course of action and walk away, but we want to be people who listen, who ask good questions, and who help other people set goals. In other words, we want to be there alongside of them. If somebody doesn't have a sense of direction, these skills are not all that helpful. But if somebody says, I want to get here, and I'm here, then this aspect takes conversation and discussion to a new level. All right, let me tell you a story about how this works, and then I'll show you what kinds of questions we ask and how we do this. Several years ago, I was speaking at a Christian school. It was teacher training. So if you're an educator, you know you have to get continuing education units. This is required. A lot of people have to do this. Anybody in professions, if you're in nursing or law or anything else, you have these continuing education units you have to get. So you have to go to seminars. Well, a lot of schools will say, just come to the school, we'll get all the teachers together, you teach us for a whole day, we'll get all of our continuing education units, very efficient. I decided to teach, it was a Christian school, I decided to teach about coaching. And the way this buddy of mine who started this company with me, the way we did this is we would just ask somebody from the audience, what is a problem that you're trying to solve or a goal that you would like to set? And we have somebody come up on stage and we demonstrate the coaching technique right there in front of everybody. What I learned over time is that you should ask 2 or 3 people that question and then pick the one that best fits the situation. At the moment, though, I was just so excited. I said, is there anybody here who has a problem they would like to solve or a goal they would like to set who would be willing to come up and have the conversation in front of the group? There are 100 teachers in the room. Lady raises her hand. I said, ma'am, would you be willing to come up here? We set up 2 stools, okay? Do not do this at home. Don't even do it in public. I mean, this is, I'll tell you the rest of the story. So I asked her, thank you for coming up on stage. I learned her name. What is the problem that you are facing that you would like to solve? She said, well, I recently had surgery, and by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm so overcome with pain that I'm focused on the pain rather than my students, and I wish I wasn't even a teacher. Wow, okay. So I just had my questions in my mind. I said, all right, if you were 6 months from now, if we were to have another conversation and I asked you, how's it going? And you said, a lot better. What would have to happen for you to be able to say that? And she said, I would have to be able to get past 1 o'clock in the afternoon without being overcome by pain. I said, great. And I glanced out at the audience. All the other teachers are like, where are you going with this? And so I asked her, I said, okay, I understand your goal. Where are you now? And she stared at me and said, I cannot make it past 1 o'clock in the afternoon without being overcome with pain. I could feel the sweat dripping down my arms. It's like, this is the worst thing ever. But I realized at that moment, there's only one possible question you could ask. What happens at 1 o'clock in the afternoon? Why is that so significant? You've mentioned it 3 times now. Without hesitation, she said, freshman Spanish. I asked her, what happens in freshman Spanish? She said, there are 3 boys in that class who do not want to be there. And they make it miserable for me. They talk, they joke, they laugh, they pester the other students. And by the time the class is done, I am so under stress, I wish I wasn't even in education. Wow. So I asked her, what do you think you should do? I mean, what are some of your options? And she said, I don't have any options. That's why I came up here, so you could coach me and tell me what to do. And I said, well, I could tell you what I would do in that situation, but I'd never been there. I said, can you think of anything that you might do? She said, no. And I had a kind of a trick question in my back pocket. I said, okay, well, you can't think of one thing. Can you think of 5 things you might do? Now, it sounds counterintuitive, but it's easier if you think about it to think of 5 possible solutions to a problem than 1, because you're not trying to edit as you go, right? She said, I can't think of 1. How am I supposed to think of 5? And I was so desperate at this point. I said, okay, I know you can't think of 5 things, but if you could think of 5 things, what would they be? The other teachers are just looking at me like, this is a total train wreck. She said, okay, well, if you're going to put it that way. She said, and she listed off, she didn't come up with 5, but she listed 3 things that she could do. The first one I remember was, she said, I could talk to the freshman boys coach and try to get insight into, what's going on with these boys. So she came up with 3 options, and I asked, if you could only do one of those 3, what one would you start with? She said, I would talk to the freshman boys coach. I said, okay, great. When are you going to talk to the freshman boys coach? Probably on Monday. I said, what are you going to ask him? Well, how do I handle these boys? I said, how do you know he wants to talk to you? And she literally, on the stool, she said, hey, coach. And from the audience, I hear, yeah. I said, he's here? Yeah, he's right over there, she said. I said, Coach, you want to talk to her about this problem? And he said, yes, I do. With the kind of resolve that only a coach can express. Underneath which is this: if those 3 boys live through the weekend, this problem will be solved. And you know exactly how coaches do it. They're so persuasive. Boys, your freshman Spanish teacher is my good friend. And she's not having fun in class with you. And so you're going to start running laps until you can stop and tell me what you're going to do to make my friend happy. Otherwise, you are going to be running laps until the second coming of Christ. It was a Christian school, so they can say things like that. You see, what was weird in that situation is she came up with a distress, an intractable problem. She had no idea what she was going to do. I had no idea what I was doing other than just asking questions. Inside of 10 minutes, she came up with a solution that I never would have thought of, that I knew would really make a difference. Why? Because God in His providence superintends in the process of intentional conversations. So I thought it was pretty cool, and I thought, I'll just share with you the way my mind was working in those questions, because that might be helpful to you. So goal was the first question. We used grow. I don't know where we got that, but it wasn't new with us, with my buddy and me. We just took the idea and started applying it to companies. Goal, what would you like to work on? Our reality, where are you now? So where would you like to be? That was 6 months from now, what would you want their preferred future to look like? Reality, where are you now? How far are you from that? Because we have to be real about where things are. Then options. What are some of the possible solutions? I could have come up with some, but I want the other person to be actively involved. Why? Because if the other person comes up with a solution to a problem that she's experiencing, she's a lot more likely to work on it than if I just say, well, why don't you try this, or why don't you try this? You know, there's this famous line in Lord of the Rings: advice is a dangerous gift, even from a friend to a friend. And then finally is will. What will you commit to do? And how will you measure your success? How will you know that you did it? All right, can you imagine that being part of your conversations? When somebody says, I'm so frustrated with what's going on. And when people say they're frustrated, sometimes they don't want advice. If you say, oh, here's what you should do, it's the wrong answer, okay? Guys, you all know this. Yeah. But I feel like, I'm in this situation. I don't know what the best response is. So what I've learned to do, and I don't know if it's the best thing, is how can I support you? What would be most helpful? Do you want me to just hear the frustration? Do you want me to try to figure out what I would do if I were in that situation? Could I ask you some questions to see if we could come up with a solution? Would that be of interest to you? You see what's happening with these 3 skills? With conversation, discussion, and coaching, we're moving intentionally toward the place where we become the kind of people others can turn to for all kinds of things about life. I'll close with a quick story. Living in Colorado Springs and working in Manitou Springs, sometimes over my lunch break, I can go for a run. I can take my lunch and just go for a run. And what's cool about it is Garden of the Gods Park, you know about Garden of the Gods, is 1 mile from our building. So I can run to the Garden of the Gods Park and then through the park. During the wintertime, it's awesome because nobody's there. Springtime, people start coming out. Everybody wants to picnic, have their picture next to the balanced rock and all of that. So I was one day running up there in the springtime, and it's like all kinds of people around, and I'm irritated because this is my park. I've been here all winter. And you people just show up all of a sudden. And I got down to the first hill, and there's a blockade and a police car. I said, they're blocking off the road. I just went up and I said, I assume it's okay for runners to go on through. He said, yeah, it's fine, it's fine. So I just kept on running. I put my earbuds back in. As I went up and down the next hill, 500 people were running toward me. I quickly noticed, however, there were orange cones in the middle of the road. They were all running on this side, and I was running on this side. So at first I ignored them, and then I noticed something really uncomfortable. Every one of them was staring at me with a look of disbelief on their face. Why are they staring at me? All of a sudden it occurred to me that they were running down that side of the road to a turnaround spot and then coming back at the direction I was going. I was winning by a lot. And they could tell from my running pace and body composition, this simply was not possible. So funny though. As soon as I realized I was winning, I started running faster. Like, I don't know what race I'm in or where the finish line is or anything, but you got all these people. Scripture talks about that. By the way, this is a picture from the race. This was the guy that passed me, who truly did win the race. But Scripture talks about that, a great cloud of witnesses. That all of the patriarchs from all of Scripture, all the people of faith, that we sit in community with them, that we have our opportunity to run our part of the race of life, then we pass that baton on to someone else, and we go up in the stands and become the ones who cheer. In the last several years, as I have realized that this is where I am in my season of life, I've actually added to my signature whenever I write a note to somebody or send an email to them, I'm cheering for you. That's the spirit that I feel I really need to develop in this season of life. I want to be that guy who is trusted as a wise counselor so that when the opportunity comes to talk about the most important things in life, I've got that credibility. And people feel safe to have discussions with me. What difference does it make? Well, I'll tell you, at Summit Ministries, it makes a huge difference. Summit Ministries, you know that 4% of young adults who regularly attend church in the United States of America, only 4% of them have a biblical worldview. Are you aware of that? That research comes from George Barna, a veteran social researcher. 4%. By the time they leave 2 weeks at Summit, 86% have a biblical worldview. What happens? Truth and relationship come together, where they feel safe to ask their difficult questions, to seek answers, and to answer the ultimate question that we talk about there, which is, what barriers would stop you personally from living a life that's fully committed to Jesus?